Today on NewsWatch, ISIS sends a warning to New York City. See how officials are stepping up security in the wake of recent terror attacks. Plus, we're hearing from presidential candidate John Kasich. See how the Ohio governor says he would change the way America deals with terrorists. And turning pain into purpose, what this man is doing to change the lives of foster children in Atlanta. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. National security is a major concern in the wake of the deadly terrorist attacks in Paris. Major cities across the U.S. increasing police presence and safety measures. This as the latest ISIS propaganda video threatens to strike New York City. A message released only 48 hours after a similar video targeting Washington, D.C. Caitlin Burke is on the story.
Defiant in the face of terrorism, New York City's mayor and police commissioner stood together in the middle of Times Square Wednesday evening, vowing that while they'll take necessary precautions, their city will not live in fear.
To make very, very clear that the people of New York City will not be intimidated.
A new ISIS propaganda video brags about the Paris terror attacks and shows images of New York City, bombs and suicide bombers preparing for an attack. This only 48 hours after a similar video threatening to strike the nation's capital.
We have more police in the District of Columbia than any city in the United States. They have assured me that they're at an even higher level.
U.S. intelligence officials warn that while they're doing all they can to prevent an attack here at home, the growing number of radicalized Americans inspired by ISIS are stretching their resources. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Morton Storm, a former jihadist turned spy for the CIA and M16, says an attack during the holiday season is very likely.
I have a feeling that, or a bad feeling that, and I do hope I'm wrong, but it's going to either be in this holiday in America or it's going to be for Christmas. People are opportunists, or those kind of terrorists are opportunists. They are the intent to create fear in people's heart. I know I will do that by saying that too, but I want people to be aware that there are enemies out there.
CBN News terrorism analyst Eric Stackelbeck agrees, saying major shopping seasons create the perfect environments for an attack.
Look, Thanksgiving, obviously, Black Friday, huge shopping day, right? The Christmas shopping season coming. These are, unfortunately, prime targets.
And one FBI official recently told the Washington Times the attackers could look and act just like everyday Americans until they strike with weapons we haven't seen in terror attacks here. Authorities warn people to be careful of more attacks aimed at soft targets like sporting events, hotel parties, restaurants, or other entertainment venues. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Republicans in Congress are working to pass a bill this week that would pause efforts to bring Syrian refugees into the U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan wants a bill that says Syrian and Iraqi refugees could only be admitted to the U.S. if intelligence and law enforcement officials can certify they won't be a security threat. President Obama is threatening to veto the bill, rejecting all calls to make more time to vet for refugees for security risks. Republican governors are upset with the way the president has handled their concerns.
What was sad and very disappointing is how dismissive the president is when we ask the tough questions on how are we going to vet individuals when there is no documentation, there isn't anything out there for us to confirm that the individual coming in as a refugee isn't really a terrorist, as it resulted in France.
When you have terrible events like this happening in Paris, in Egypt with the airliner, in Lebanon, isn't it just good common sense to say, when these things happen, shouldn't we be looking at our own practices in this country to say, are there things we should be doing better or differently than what we're doing today to make sure we're being safe about who we're having come into the country? And always remember, we want to be a welcoming country.
At least 30 governors are opposing President Obama's plan to bring in 10,000 refugees from Syria over the next 12 months. A Jewish teacher was stabbed in the southern French city of Marseille by 3 supporters of ISIS. The 57-year-old man survived after being stabbed in the arm and leg. The attack was interrupted when a car drove up to the scene. One of the attackers was wearing an ISIS T-shirt, and the trio praised a homegrown French Islamist militant who killed 7 Jewish people in 2012. A few weeks ago, a rabbi was also knifed in Marseille. Meanwhile, we are learning more details about the massive terror raid in Paris yesterday. Our Abigail Robertson has more on what French law enforcement officials uncovered in the Saint-Denis neighborhood.
A female suicide bomber, weapons, and a team eerily similar to the one that carried out Friday's attacks. This is what French law enforcement uncovered in a Paris suburb close to the stadium targeted on Friday. Authorities had hoped to find the 27-year-old terror mastermind behind Friday's attacks. The raid ended in 8 arrests and 2 dead, one being a woman who blew herself up with a suicide vest. She is thought to be the cousin of Friday's ringleader. Police sources say they are convinced the jihadists were about to move on another attack in Paris just before the start of the busy morning commute. Despite the Saint-Denis raid, officials are still working around the clock to prevent any additional attacks aimed at the city of Paris. One intelligence source told me French officials are bracing themselves for another attack as they have good reason to believe there are more ISIS sleeper cells around the country. In a statement to French mayors, President Hollande reiterated the violent nature of Wednesday's raid proves France is at war against terror. He says they must destroy this army that menaces the entire world, not just some countries. His speech continued saying it was the youth of France who were targeted simply because they represent life. President Hollande has deployed an aircraft carrier to the eastern Mediterranean in order to boost operations in Syria as France intensifies its bombing campaign against ISIS. Reporting from Paris, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
In California, a judge has ruled a woman must thaw and discard her frozen embryos. Divorcee Mimi Lee signed a written consent with her ex-husband to destroy the couple's embryos if they got divorced. But now Lee wants to keep them because she says it is her last chance to have children. The court has overruled her objections, stating that the agreement trumps Lee's desires to keep the embryos. No California law had previously ruled in such a case. A group preparing to do battle with the Obama administration in the Supreme Court is asking for your prayers. Priests for Life is fighting the HHS contraception mandate under Obamacare. The mandate requires employers to provide insurance coverage for contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs or pay a fine, even if they think the drugs are immoral.
This is an extremely serious case because if, in fact, the mandate is upheld, then we do not have religious freedom anymore in the sense that the government cannot compel a person to violate his or her conscience. If this mandate is upheld, then the government is compelling us and many others to violate our conscience. And that's a radical departure from religious freedom, even if one doesn't agree with us on the specifics of this case, namely abortion-inducing drugs or contraceptives. Put the issues of that aside. It's a question of, can the government force a believer to act contrary to his or her beliefs? That's how important this case is.
Priests for Life says that if the court rules in favor of the contraception mandate, it could clear the way for the government to add other mandates like insurance coverage for abortion. Indianapolis police say a handgun has been found near their home where a local pastor's wife was killed last week. Investigators are examining the weapon to see if it matches the one used to kill Amanda Blackburn. Meanwhile, Blackburn's neighbors are working to help authorities find the killer. They've been gathering to discuss ways to help, including recruiting local businesses. A local pizzeria is now distributing a flyer asking for information, leading to the killer with every order.
Hoping that one of our customers might know something, either through via word of mouth, or maybe they recognize the picture from just seeing the feedback on TV.
Blackburn's husband, Pastor Davey, says she did not have an enemy in the world. Coming up, the Republican presidential field may be shrinking, but there's still a long way to go. Hear from Ohio Governor John Kasich on why he thinks he's the right man for the job. Republican presidential candidate John Kasich visited Regent University yesterday for a presidential candidate forum. In the wake of last week's terror attacks in Paris, the Ohio governor emphasized his strong stance on national security. Our Heather Sells reports.
In his opening remarks, Governor Kasich wasted no time in getting to the news of the week. The ISIS attacks on Paris, he said, are an attack on us all.
We need a significant coalition, a coalition of our friends in Europe, a coalition that would include our people who see things in a lot of the same ways we do in the Middle East, that we would join together and move immediately to destroy ISIS where it exists. We cannot wait any longer. You either pay me now or you will pay me a lot more later. And it's time for the United States to assume leadership.
While the world's response to ISIS dominated his short talk, he also emphasized a strong economy, paving the way for Pat Robertson's opening question.
Tell us about that Ohio miracle. How in the world did you do it? I was in Cleveland. That place was run down, something awful. And now you've got a stable credit rating, you're paying off your bills. How'd you do it?
We were running an $8 billion deficit, Pat. People said you had to raise taxes. Our credit was going down the drain. I said, raise taxes. If Pat Robertson and I own a restaurant and we don't have any customers and I say, Pat, why don't we just raise our prices? You'd laugh at me. So what we did is we demonstrated, we went through all the programs, we made them work better, and some we got rid of. We restrained spending, we cut taxes, and today we've gone from an $8 billion hole to a $2 billion surplus. We've cut taxes.
Kasich says the first thing he'd do as president is to focus on jobs by cutting taxes for both individuals and corporations. He'd also move to cut federal spending with plans like this.
And, by the way, get rid of some of this really crazy regulation. We should freeze all major regulation for at least 1 year, and we need to begin to institute common sense.
This week, Kasich moved to halt the flow of Syrian refugees to the Buckeye State, and he has taken not-so-subtle jabs at President Obama's action, or lack of it, in the wake of the Paris attacks.
The president said that ISIS is the JV team. He has said just recently that it has been contained. He said it just before the attacks in France. Would you like to comment on the conduct of the foreign policy of the nation in the last few weeks?
Well, you know, what's astounding about it is created vacuums that are being filled by others, and people have learned to not trust the United States, our friends. A perfect example of that is the red line in Syria, where we said that we would go, and then we just walked away. Here's, I believe, the way it works. First of all, the United States is the convening nation. We are the strength of the free world. If I were president, I would be in Europe, and I would be convincing them, and I don't think it would take a lot to convince them that their very way of life and their very existence is at risk. And we need to work jointly to destroy the threat.
Do you think Article 5 of the NATO agreement, which says if one nation is attacked, they're all attacked and all should come to the aid of the one, should we come in right now as the United States and go beside France and help in this crisis?
And I was the first one to call for using Article 5. Today, the French basically said we're going to work with our European allies. They did this almost when we were dealing with Yugoslavia, then they ultimately turned to us. So I think we need to make it clear to the French, anything you need, anything you want, we stand shoulder to shoulder with you.
In addition to France, Kasich told Robertson the U.S. should arm the Kurds fighting ISIS and bolster its support for Ukraine in the midst of a protracted conflict with Russia.
The Ukrainians have had a long history of suffering, and people have tried to blot out their history, and all they want to do is to fight for themselves. We've got to give them what they need. We don't have to put troops on the ground. This is a case where they will do what they need to do in their own interest. Just give them the help. And that sends a message to all those nations in the eastern part of Europe, you know, who struggled for so long to be free.
Let's talk about that agreement that was just signed with the Iranians having to do with nuclear, the whole nuclear program of the Iranians. They scoffed at us right after we signed it. That has not been ratified by the Senate. If you were president, would you cancel that deal?
Well, Pat, I would certainly hold the Iranians accountable and make sure that our allies know that any violation of that means that we as a group slap those sanctions on that brought the Iranians to the table. You know, I really believe in multilateral action. I don't want to signal anything 15, 16 months ahead of an election. But what I will tell you is any violation of that agreement, even if we need to move unilaterally to slap the sanctions back on, we should have to do it. And if we find that they're developing a nuclear weapon and we know where it is, that's not acceptable.
There's much more to that interview with John Kasich. You can find the entire report on today's 700 Club and at cbnnews.com. Up next, a man trying to find loving homes for children in foster care because he used to be a foster care child himself. Hear how he turned his pain into purpose. There are nearly 400,000 children in foster care in America, and many of them are forced to move from home to home as they face challenge after challenge. Atlanta businessman Rick Jackson was a foster child himself, and he faced those same problems. That is, until an anonymous Christmas gift changed his life. As Charlene Aaron shows us, he is now giving back to other children in need.
1,500 providers.
Rick Jackson knows the business world and the success that can come with it.
God has really blessed me with material success from that standpoint. So, yes, I have been fortunate.
As an entrepreneur, he started a healthcare staffing company, which now serves more than 5 million patients across 1,300 facilities. A big difference from his life growing up.
It was very chaotic, dysfunctional. My mother was an alcoholic. My dad left me when I was 9 months old, and we had 7 stepfathers.
The Fox Theater here in Atlanta is filled with childhood memories for Rick Jackson, a time from when he was abandoned and rejected. But he has since turned the pain of his past into a purpose.
I was between 9 and 11 years old. My mother would drop me off here on Saturday around 12 o'clock to see a double feature by myself and then come back most times and pick me up at 10 o'clock that night.
At 13, Jackson ran away from home and spent 6 years in foster care. Once placed in a Christian home, he experienced the love he always wanted.
I saw a family hold hands and pray. It gave me a picture of how a functional Christian family works.
Yet after about a year, he ran away again.
I couldn't take the fact that somebody would love me like they did.
He ended up at United Methodist Children's Home, where he recalls spending one holiday alone.
During Christmas, most of them went home to some family member or something like that. Well, I didn't. And I think there were a few other kids on campus that didn't go home. So, you know, I was there. First Christmas, Christmas was always a big deal to me, and, you know, being by myself and so forth. It was a very, very sad time. And then I cried myself to sleep.
The next morning, he received a surprise gift that would change his life.
I had this white envelope that said, from an anonymous donor, and I opened it up, and there was a $100 bill in there. And I was like, wow.
After that, Jackson says life took a different turn. He eventually reunited with his Christian foster family, attended college, and at 21 began his first business. He credits that turnaround to a faith that was born during the most difficult times of his life.
I relied heavily on God. It was out of the pain I was experiencing as a child, and there was nowhere else to look to.
That Christmas envelope put Jackson on a spiritual journey to spread goodness. One example is Faith Bridge Foster Care, which brings together local churches and the Department of Child Services.
We believe that the church should own this problem, that in James 1:27, it talks about the widows and orphans.
Jackson often shares his story of hope with those in foster care.
I know that they wonder how come they're in this situation, how come their mother or father doesn't love them or doesn't show, or dysfunctional, or why can't they get their act together? Why can't they quit drinking? And what that does to a child is just says, I'm unloved and unwanted. And I think the main message is that God does love you, and that your earthly parents may let you down, but your Heavenly Father won't.
He says helping others is his life's purpose.
through the pain of going through a dysfunctional family, foster care and so forth. It helped me identify just recently. My purpose, the reason I was put here on earth was to transform the way kids are in foster care and to transform the foster care system and to focus on solving that problem. I think that was why I was built here.
A purpose he sees playing out every day. Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Atlanta, Georgia.
The church should indeed own this problem. God calls us to widows and orphans. Good to see that work. Stay with us. We're coming right back. It is time now for your Thursday Thankful, and today let us pause to give thanks for where we are right now in life, whether we like it or not. And consider this: at times your past may look better than your present, but it will never outshine your future. So press forward with gratitude for today and faith to know the best is yet to come. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that online, and we hope you'll join us again right here next time. It is Thursday. Let's make it a thankful one.